Welcome to Walk in the Park. My name's Tony Ingram, and we are here on November 28th for our 30th episode. And we will go to a lot of different places today. Let's see. We're going to go to parks in Virginia and North Carolina. Okay, so this time, let's take a look at our map. We were here last week. We went down to the Chesapeake Bay. Now, this is a Landsat NASA photograph from space a couple of weeks ago, showing, I put the labels in there, showing where we are in the Finger Lakes. And down at the bottom is the Chesapeake Bay, which actually is, its watershed is not that far from us. Just the southern part of Tompkins County, the streams actually drain into the Susquehanna River down to the Chesapeake Bay. So I'm going to go farther in, closer here, and look at where we were last week. The Virginia Peninsula, that's where the City of Hampton and Norfolk and Newport News, well actually Norfolk is just below the Virginia Peninsula, and it says Hampton Roads, and that is the bottom of the Chesapeake Bay where it joins the Atlantic Ocean and where the James River comes in, and it's a big area. It's actually the largest, maybe the largest natural harbor in the United States, and some say the world. In any case, I was there. Here's a picture of me. This was a couple of weeks ago in Hampton, the city of Hampton, right at the end of the Virginia Peninsula. And that's me and two buddies in an organization I've been in for many years called the National Association for Interpretation, which is a term that needs interpretation, a name that needs interpretation. Interpreters are people not that interpret language, but interpret our heritage, interpret our cultural heritage, our natural heritage, and places like parks and historic sites and museums and zoos and botanical gardens. And on my right, the fellow on the left, is a guy named Rick McGee, and he works for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which, as an interpreter, as a park ranger, and now he's in charge of signs, national signs, that go in Army Corps of Engineer sites. But there are a lot of parklands that are managed by the Army Corps of Engineers, usually around bodies of water like canals and dams and so forth. So he's been involved in that. And then the fellow on my left is Bruce Bierbauer, and he is at Catawba Science Center in Hickory, North Carolina. We're old friends, and we got together at the conference here. So anyway, during the conference, after a couple of days of great sessions, workshop sessions, and so forth, we went on what they call off-site session, going to a field trip to a site that's relevant to our interests. So we went, take a look at this image here. Looking, the upper left center is again Hampton Roads, but then down along the coast, that's Virginia Beach going down there along the coast in the lower center of the picture. And then you can see it says Back Bay National Wildlife Refuge and False Cape State Park, and that's where our field trip went. And very interesting sites. Now, this is the map of the Back Bay National Wildlife Refuge just south of Virginia Beach, all the green area there. So it includes the, it's a barrier island. A barrier beach was not really an island because it is connected to the mainland at the northern end, but it's an extension, the northernmost extension of the Outer Banks. So Fire Island is a place like this. The beaches along the New Jersey shore are places like this. These are islands that have been shaped, or spits of land that have been shaped by the ocean. And then they have these big bays behind them that usually are fairly shallow and have a lot of wildlife and so forth. So there's oceanfront and wildlife. Now just below on the lower right there, you might be able to make out it says False Cape State Park. So we're actually going to spend most of our time there. We have to go through the wildlife refuge, and you can only get to the state park via, you can only get to the state park through the wildlife refuge by walking, bicycling, or they have a tram, but you can't take your own vehicle. And the tram runs in the summer, and then on weekends in the fall and the spring and the wintertime only on special occasions like ours. So we took the tram through the wildlife refuge, and here's some images from the wildlife refuge. This is looking back into the bay behind the ocean. which is very important for nursery for fish and oysters and that sort of thing, and particularly also birds, waterfowl, wading birds, migratory birds, and in this case is a picture of an osprey, which feeds largely on fish. So they're very important for wildlife, and that's why these places have been protected. Wildlife refuges are all over the country now. There's many of them, and they protect critical nesting and migratory and feeding habitat for wildlife, particularly birds, but not exclusively. So one of our guides, we have two excellent naturalist guides on the field trip, was Vicki Schumer, and she's not Schumer, is it Schuler, I guess. Anyway, she was a excellent naturalist, has written some books on wild foods and herbs and so forth, and knows this area tremendously. And so here we are on the bay side here, looking into the bay, and she's showing us some plants, some more pictures of some of the animals and some of the habitat in the wildlife refuge. In the upper left is the ocean side. There's several miles of wild beach that you can walk along. And on the upper right, so these are all the ocean side creatures. The bird on the upper right is an oyster catcher, which is distinctive for its bright orange bill. And then lower right are loggerhead sea turtles emerging from their nests. So this is an important place for sea turtles to come ashore and be not be bothered by humans and dune buggies and parties and what have you as they lay their eggs and as their eggs hatch. And then there's a little seal pup, a harbor seal, I presume. So there's a pretty good wildlife habitat there. We didn't see a lot of wildlife at the Back Bay National Wildlife Refuge, except we did see some tundra swans, but there's a tremendous migration of waterfowl coming down from the north right now. It's been up, actually when we were there 2-3 weeks ago, much of the migratory waterfowl, like snow geese in particular, were up north, perhaps even in Montezuma and so forth, at the northern end of Cayuga Lake, and they would move down. You'd have thousands of snow geese and Canada geese and many other birds using these brackish bays behind the barrier islands and spits along the coast. So we're going to pop down to Falls Cape State Park. In fact, I'm going to zoom in here on my hat. I like to wear a hat or get a hat when I go to a new place, and I was able to get this one. I particularly like this one because the woman in the visitor center told me that she had actually taken a photograph of this scene looking back into the bay, and then from that photograph this embroidery was made so on the hat. So that's kind of special. It's not just a generic picture, it's actually from Falls Cape. So here's a information sign and map and so forth about the park. As we gotten into it, we'd taken the tram down in, and one of our other guides, actually Doug Elliott, is from North Carolina, is an outstanding naturalist, but he's also an amazing storyteller and songwriter, and he puts on quite a show. But he is just loaded with information. And right here he's showing us Spanish moss, which is what they call an epiphyte. It's a plant that's actually a flowering plant that grows on trees. This is sort of the northern part of its range. If you go down into the deep south or down to Charleston or something, you'll see this hanging off the live oak trees and so forth. But here it is in southeast Virginia, and that's kind of cool. And he was showing us how it absorbs water. You pour water and it absorbs water, and also turns color and some other things about it. It was very cool. So this whole area was occupied pretty much by squatters for a long time. It was sort of beyond the law, beyond much administration by government for many years, and so there were some very informal communities there that preceded the refuge and the state park, and so some of their evidence of them is still there. Obviously, this headstone, some little conch shells there, and so forth. So we went down over the dune community. The dunes protect the island from the ravages of the ocean, things like Hurricane Sandy, where dunes were washed over farther north, over barrier islands. So there's a big dune community on there, and we walked a lot through the dune community. It's pretty interesting. Here is an old car that's a remnant of the old squatter communities that were there. And looking down on the group from this platform. This was an observation platform that you can see out over the scrub forest, which is made up largely of live oak trees and loblolly pines, looking out over towards the ocean. That's actually the ocean. We didn't actually get, or some of us did actually get out to walk the ocean here, but others of us didn't. And looking out over the loblolly pines, it's a three-needled bundled pine that grows down along the coast. So that was a really, really great trip, and a somewhat new area to me. I'd been to the Wildlife Refuge before, but not to that state park. So that's the really only open, wild ocean front of Virginia. So then we went back to our conference in Hampton, and I took, on the last morning, I took a little trip of my own out to Buckroe Beach, which is a beach right in the city of Hampton on the Chesapeake Bay and in Hampton Roads and so forth. And so what's the significance of that? Well, there's a lot of significance to me because I was a little kid. I grew up as a little kid in Hampton. So it's one of the reasons I went to this conference is this was my hometown, my original hometown. I lived there until I was in the 3rd grade. And this was my first beach, and those little waves were my first waves. I remember being afraid of them. And so it was fun to go back. I hadn't been back there since probably 1955. So an amazing long period of time. And a lot had changed, but some things hadn't. There used to be an amusement park there, but I think I remember this old anchor and pictures that we took of it possibly that was there. But the amusement park was gone, and the haunted house wasn't there anymore where I got terrified. My father took me in and so forth. So, but the beach is still there and still popular. And it's interesting, I just read recently that, and I wasn't aware at the time, that there was another beach just adjacent to it that was for black folks, and the whites were on this beach. It was legal segregation back there in the early 50s. That ended later in that decade, but that eventually, I guess, was joined. But another interesting thing there that you usually don't find at a beach was this warning sign, which nearby there's a fort which has now become a national monument, I guess, called Fort Monroe, but it's been there as a fort actually in the Civil War, but an Old Point Comfort area that was been a fortification since the 17th century. But the beach, Buckroe Beach, had its sand replenished a couple times in the 1990s. I guess storms had washed a lot of it away, so they had replenished it from the bay, and then they started finding munitions. They started finding shells in the artillery shells or in the sand. So they had this sign up saying they cleaned it out as much as possible, but if you find something, they tell you what to do. So that's an unusual warning that to find along a beach. Well, also in this area in Hampton, this guy came ashore in 1607. He was Christopher Newport, and those are the ships of the Jamestown colony. And they settled the village of Jamestown in that year. But they stopped here at Hampton. They stopped up just north of Virginia Beach at what's called Point Henry. And they stopped here. And the city of Newport News is named after Christopher Newport. And I went down after the conference. I went down to Newport News Point. And there's different speculation as to how it got the name News, but maybe it was a new place. But in any case, so it was settled around that same time. In fact, Hampton itself was settled in 1610, 3 years after the Jamestown colony, and is said to be the oldest continuously inhabited English-speaking community in the United States. But Newport News became a shipbuilding area. This fellow, there's a little park there, Newport News Park, and they went down to that. And this fellow, Collis Potter Huntington, he recognized the incredible quality of the harbor of Hampton Roads, and that's what the Hampton Roads means, is that it's a harbor, I guess. And really didn't need much modification to be a great harbor. And so he started a shipbuilding industry there, and it's still there. And I could get some views from the park of some of the ships. A lot of Navy ships are built there and worked on there, and that was kind of cool. And it's particularly significant to me because the reason I lived in Hampton, the reason I was born in that area, is that my father moved there in the beginning of World War II, and he worked on these ships, not these, but ships at the time, Liberty ships and so forth, and he put radars and compasses and so forth on them, working enormous hours, climbing steel masts on the ships and all kinds of weather to go out and take cargo to England particularly, and sometimes they would see the Liberty ships offshore being sunk by burning on the horizon, being sunk by German U-boats back in World War II. I was born just after World War II. So, after the conference, I went down to Virginia Beach, which is, like I said, just below Chesapeake Bay, just below Hampton Roads, and just north of the wildlife refuge I was at. So here's some scenes. It was a very, the next morning was a very rough weather, and it was powerful waves, and the weather was not that good. And here's the hotel zone along the beach there. It's been very heavily developed over the years, and so some people say that maybe is not so nice, but on the view from the hotel is great. And anyway, here's the boardwalk along the hotel zone there, and people, it's not really made of boards, but that's what they call it, and people run and walk and ride their bicycles. Well, there's actually a bike lane off to the left there. They don't ride their bicycles on the boardwalk. But so let's see, what do we got here? Okay, here's a picture of at night, starting in the fall. They set up lights along the boardwalk, and pedestrians can't go there after dark until like midnight or something. And they allow automobiles to drive along. They actually charge a fee for it, and see all these Christmas lights set up along the boardwalk, and so that's kind of cute. And so I have actually a little video that of the Virginia Beach here that I took. It has this and other things in it. So I'll just bring that up here in a second, and I'm going to cue it up. All right, it's coming up, coming up. Okay, so that last image you saw there was a foam blowing along the beach. And here's a still image of it. And so when we first looked at that, I said, "What in the world is this? This is like some kind of pollution or something?" And can't rule that out, but probably natural. It's called sea foam, and when the water gets really rough and churns up, there are natural surfactants in the water that will actually make bubbles and hold them for a while, often produced by algae, particularly if there's been like an algal bloom offshore perhaps. there might be more likelihood of that. And if it's a really bad algal bloom, then maybe you'll even have some health issues related to it. But it's a natural phenomenon, sea foam. I'm sure you've heard of it. But we get that actually in our gorges on a much smaller scale. Sometimes when the water is really rough, you'll get a little foam in the eddies in our gorges, and it's again natural substances, and usually derived from the soil, the humic acids and so forth in the soil, and make a little foam. So after my last visit to Virginia Beach, I wanted to go to a place I'd always wanted to at least see a little bit of, and that's a place called Dismal Swamp. Dismal Swamp, wow. Why would anybody want to go to Dismal Swamp? Well, some guy back in the 1600s or 1700s named it that when he first surveyed it, but it's really kind of an interesting place. Now, if you look at this map just south of Norfolk, you see Virginia Beach there, and you see the area that's in the orangish, brownish color. That is the swamp, at least the part of it that is in a wildlife refuge and state park. And we'll get another view of it here. This is the Dismal Swamp National Wildlife Refuge. And back in the last century, it was recognized that this large area of wetland, which had been, a lot of it had been drained and become farmed, a large proportion of it had been heavily logged, had significant ecological value in terms of, particularly in terms of value to wildlife. So a wildlife refuge was created there. The Nature Conservancy bought up the land and then transferred it to the National Wildlife Refuge system of the U.S. Department of Interior, I think. And then if you look to the lower right, it says Dismal Swamp State Park. So North Carolina, it's just straddles the border of North Carolina, so just below the border is this state park, which I took a trip down. I went down to Dismal Swamp State Park, and I was there on kind of a dismal day. But I did get to see a little bit of it. If I'd gotten going earlier, I might have gone to the other side of the wildlife refuge and gotten in there. And in fact, well, let's see. Here's a visitor center, that really nice visitor center they just put up in the last few years. It has great a little museum in there, and it's a really nice place. But you have to cross a little bridge, a little swinging bridge, not a swinging bridge, but a bridge that swings aside for boats coming through this U.S. Army Corps of Engineers project here, which is the Dismal Swamp Canal, part of the intra-coastal waterway. There's a system of canals and bays and so forth that allow you to travel up and down the East Coast without going out on the ocean. And so this is part of it. So along the eastern edge of the Dismal Swamp, there is a canal, which you might be able to make out on the right-hand side of the refuge here in the state park. And you could take your boat along there. Well, the building of canals, and particularly in the 1800s, of ditches to drain and get access to the swamp, really has affected the hydrology. I don't know how much this canal has affected it, but some of the earlier ones, in fact, George Washington, there's a canal named after him that was built early on in the Dismal Swamp. I don't know if that's in that picture. There is a Washington Canal in there somewhere. Yeah, it's actually, you see a lake in the middle there, and that's called Lake Drummond. And just at the upper end of it there is a ditch, they call it. And it's Washington Ditch, and it said this may be the first monument to George Washington. So all kinds of ditches were cut through there for access, largely for logging. So so I crossed that canal and went on a boardwalk. There is a short boardwalk that goes into the swamp, and so I got to see a number of trees and so forth. This was American holly, which we don't have hardly at all around here. There might be some little bits of it, and it's planted, of course, and lots of cultivars, but there's quite a lot of it down there, and little benches and so forth. A lot of the trees, though, that are in the Dismal Swamp that used to be dominant there, like bald cypress and Atlantic white cedar, are not as common. They're greatly reduced, and so I didn't really get to see them. I might have if I'd gone into followed one of the canals into Lake Drummond, for instance. But they were cut for lumber, and also the changing in the hydrology and the lack of wildfires has resulted in, which naturally sweep over a place like that and set back succession. Things like red maple have taken over. So here's just walking along the boardwalk, some of the scenes along there. Quite a few trees have been upended by the wind or whatever. And you can see the soil is wet, the water table is very high, and I'm sure this provides a lot of little microhabitats for amphibians and so forth. So this is sweet gum. The little branches coming off a sweet gum, and I have a picture of a big sweet gum coming up here. And there were a number of interpretive signs or informational educational signs along there. There's a lot of black bears in the Dismal Swamp. It's one of the best black bear habitats on the East Coast, the sign says, and the entire area is bear friendly, providing abundant cover, food, and potential mates. Biologists estimate that more than 350 black bears live in the Dismal Swamp region. So that's kind of cool. And I didn't see any black bears, but I did see photographs of them. Snakes! Oh my gosh, snakes! They didn't show any poison snakes in here, but this sign was actually trying to reduce our fear about snakes. Snakes actually play some important roles in the ecology. Some snakes eat rodents that can carry disease and damage crops and property. As predators, snakes are an important part of food webs and keep prey species in check. Some snakes have beautiful patterns like this king snake here. And so yes, I mean that we have gone after snakes. A lot of people don't realize that not every snake is poisonous, and snakes aren't bad. Snakes are good. They play an important part of our ecology. And if you take a group of organisms, or even sometimes a single organism out of an ecosystem, you can have all kinds of problems with overpopulation of prey species, deforestation by overbrowsing, erosion, a lot of different kinds of things can happen. So now this is hard to read, isn't it? It says scarcely seen, something like that. And these are animals that are in the swamp, but you're not likely to see them. You're unlikely to see some of the rarest creatures in Dismal Swamp. Why is that? Seldom seen, it says. It could be because they are simply very rare, but it also could be because they're secretive, nocturnal, or live underground. Like the bobcat. This secretive predator likes dense forest thickets and pocosins, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, in the swamp. Those are slightly higher areas that are thickets, a lot of very thick growth. Bobcats hunt for prey, mainly rabbits and large rodents, at dusk and dawn. Shrew. This tiny creature lives under the cover of logs and leaves. The shrew is insectivorous and feeds primarily on insects. Well, we're running out of time here, so we'll have to say goodbye for today, but I thank you all for joining us and joining me. And I hope you'll get outside and see some real nature and real parks very soon.